This Friday is Anthony Joshua versus Francis Ngannou, and I figured, you know what? What kind of channel am I if I don't do a prediction video for the lineal UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou in a massive boxing match against Anthony Joshua, which I will be live streaming for, so make sure you are subscribed and have notifications on. But that's not the only thing I'm going to predict. I'm not only going to predict the fight in this video, I'm also going to predict the narratives that are going to come out after the fight, in particular from the Dana White sycophants, the UFC shills, and overall the Chael Sonnens of the world. Chael Sonnen has been sniffing Dana White's ass so hard, he could tell you what Dana White had for dinner last night. And I believe regardless of the outcome, I can easily predict the narratives that these types of people are going to steer the conversation in. And I'm just going to go ahead and get out ahead of it in this video. But I don't want to rehash every particular narrative from Francis Ngannou over the past 2 years. I've covered it extensively on the channel, and I have a Francis Ngannou playlist down in the description. You can go check it out after this video if you want, where I cover all those narratives. It's like a 45-minute, 50-minute video. You can go check that out. But the main point I want to come across here is Francis Ngannou was shit on by almost everyone, including the MMA community. And one of the things that I'm most proud of on this channel is my coverage and analysis of the Francis Ngannou UFC situation, because I covered it almost perfectly. Almost perfectly. Everything that I said basically came to fruition. But one thing that I cannot take credit for is the performance of Francis Ngannou versus Tyson Fury. He boxed Tyson Fury, I believe it was last October. And going into that fight, which I was so happy that Ngannou got that massive payday that everyone said he wouldn't get, I thought, you know what? It's two different sports. I haven't watched a whole lot of boxing. I'm not a fan of boxing. Francis Ngannou has converted me into a boxing fan. I'm going to be buying the pay-per-view with a smile on my face Friday. Make sure you join me. But going into that fight, I'm like, look, it's two different sports. Francis Ngannou's been out for 2 years. He had that ACL injury. You know, what makes me believe that against the heavyweight boxing champion in Tyson Fury, he's going to get the job done? I figured he'd go out there and put on a decent performance, but I never expected him to beat Tyson Fury. And I know while technically Francis Ngannou didn't defeat Tyson Fury, in my eyes he did. In the perception of the MMA community, he did. In the perception of the majority of people, he did. This is my personal opinion. I'm not surveying every single person, but it seems like, at least in my worldview, the perception is that Francis Ngannou won. And even if you want to say, no, Joey, Tyson Fury won, and you know that's just an MMA bias because you want the MMA fighter to do well. By the way, one thing I haven't mentioned in any of my Francis Ngannou videos, the MMA community shit on Francis Ngannou badly over the course of literal 2 years, basically. But the MMA community has desperately wanted a win against boxing for years, whether it be the washed up Tyron Woodley or the washed up Ben Askren against influencer boxer Jake Paul, or Conor McGregor versus Floyd Mayweather. The MMA community has desperately wanted a win against the boxing community in the boxing ring. And Francis Ngannou finally gave them that, regardless of the actual result. Because Francis went out there against all odds and performed at a high level, super competitive fight, and dropped Tyson Fury with the left hook. And Tyson Fury is supposed to be the best heavyweight boxer. And I said going into that fight, look, I haven't seen very much heavyweight boxing. I haven't seen much boxing in general. But the heavyweight division of boxing, I've seen a Tyson Fury fight before. I'm like, it doesn't look all that good. It looks kind of sloppy. And I've always said the UFC heavyweight division is the worst division in the entire UFC. And I kind of thought that going in, but I thought, you know, it's two different sports. There's no grappling. There's no clinch work. There's no kicks. Tyson Fury's most likely going to win. But even though he technically did, Francis Ngannou won that fight and dropped Tyson Fury. And just, I mean, the shock on my face, I was so happy. I was so tickled pink for Francis Ngannou, because regardless of the fact that I desperately wanted to see him stay with the UFC and fight John Jones, that is the #1 fight I want right now, to this day. And it's the fight I've wanted for the last 3-4 years. People don't realize this fight was talked about before Francis even won the belt, when he folded Stipe Miocic like a lawn chair. Stipe still hasn't returned since then. He's getting a title shot in 2024, but that's besides the point. We've already talked about that. Stipe's answering phones at the fire department for another 6 months before he finally may get that fight. As much as I wanted Francis there, I was so happy to see Francis succeed in the Tyson Fury fight and use that fight and that momentum that he gained from that fight to parlay it into an Anthony Joshua fight. And I have never really seen Anthony Joshua fight. I've seen a little bit, clips here and there, but I went and watched a couple fights of Anthony Joshua. And there's no doubt he's a really good boxer. Again, I don't want people to think I'm some educated boxing, guy who analyzes boxing matches. I really don't. I've really seen very little boxing in my entire life. But I'm looking at Anthony Joshua. He looks like he has decent power. He has a decent amount of knockouts on his resume. And I know people are thinking, Joey's such a casual talking about this. But one thing I watched his last fight. I watched Otto Wallin. And he beat up Otto Wallin, and his corner stopped it. And, applaud to his corner for stopping it. Otto Wallin was landing a couple shots on him. And Otto Wallin, I've literally never heard his name before in my entire life. So I'm assuming he's not that good. And he didn't look very powerful at all. Okay? This is very bare bones analysis. Then I'm going back, and I remember seeing this way back when. The Andy Ruiz loss. Andy Ruiz is, I guess he's in boxing shape because he had decent cardio in the fight. But I have a better body type, overall build than Andy Ruiz. He looks like if Brian Barberina went up to heavyweight. And Andy Ruiz was tagging up Anthony Joshua, dropped him multiple times, and eventually gets the stoppage win. And I know since then, Joshua came back and got a win over Ruiz via decision and has won a bunch of fights since then, but lost to Alexander Usyk, I think is how you pronounce his name. And, since then won 3 fights. But look, I'm looking at this matchup, and I'm looking at the way Anthony Joshua boxes, and he's fast and he's powerful. But I think he's going to be worried about the power of Francis Ngannou coming back. That left hook that he landed on Tyson Fury was barely even thrown with any effort. Ngannou touched him and put him down badly. It's not like he was off balance and he got clipped with a big shot. Francis Ngannou has ungodly power, regardless of what Joe Pyfer wants to kind of say in the media. Francis Ngannou is one of the hardest hitters we've ever seen. And I think in this fight against Anthony Joshua, I think he can get the job done. And I want to be very clear. I've already said I don't know jack shit about boxing. I'm biased towards Francis Ngannou here. I desperately want Francis Ngannou to win, but that's not the only reason I'm making this pick, okay? I watched some of Anthony Joshua's footage. I'm seeing him get tagged. I think Francis Ngannou is one of the hardest punchers he's ever faced. He got finished by Andy Ruiz. I know it's years ago. I think Francis Ngannou, his rapid growth in the sport, his rapid improvement in the sport is what I'm banking on in this fight. Because we saw it in MMA. I watched Francis Ngannou from the day he debuted. I remember when he had the cornrows, okay? I remember Francis Ngannou's debut in the UFC. And I saw him rapidly improve fight after fight. I saw him against Cyril Gane with a bum knee, implement grappling and out-grapple Cyril Gane for 3 rounds and get the win. I saw him against Stipe Miocic the first time when he was a little bit more unrefined. And then he came back the second time around against Stipe Miocic and folded him like a lawn chair. And then after years off, or a little over a year off, almost 2 years off, he comes back and he has an amazing performance against arguably the best heavyweight boxer in the world in Tyson Fury. I think the improvement now from October to March, I know it's not that much time. It's 5-6 months. That's half a year. The way that Francis Ngannou rapidly improves, I think he's going to go out there and chin Anthony Joshua. Francis Ngannou showed in the Tyson Fury fight he has good cardio. That's one of the biggest things in boxing. He has a great chin. We've seen that over the course of his career. And he hasn't taken a whole lot of damage outside of that Stipe Miocic fight. And he has ungodly power. And I think he's going to be rapidly improved. And I think Joshua is going to fear the power of Francis Ngannou. I think Joshua is going to try to clinch up with him, similar to what Fury did, and kind of wear on his arms and kind of sap some of that power. But Ngannou, whether it's the first round or the 10th round, I think Ngannou still has that one-punch KO power. So I'm picking Francis Ngannou. I'm going to say 4th round KO. He gets it done over Anthony Joshua. No doubt about it. Puts him out cold. That's what I'm picking for the fight. Now, as far as the narratives that are going to come after this fight, and we're going to talk about if Francis Ngannou wins versus Francis Ngannou loses. If Francis Ngannou wins, there's going to be a couple different narratives that are going to come out. The narrative that's going to come out first is, well, this didn't do any pay-per-view buys. We saw Chael Sonnen already do that after the Tyson Fury match. First off, the pay-per-view buys didn't matter. Second off, the numbers that Chael Sonnen espoused were factually incorrect, okay? But also, the pay-per-view buys didn't matter. It was just a way to delegitimize Francis Ngannou. The next narrative that I think is going to come out if Francis Ngannou wins, and I really think this is going to be the primary narrative, is going to be, well, and we've already seen this a little bit, it's going to be, well, nobody can recreate this. Francis Ngannou struck, caught lightning in a bottle, essentially. We've already seen that a little bit after the Fury fight, but they're going to say, you know what, nobody can recreate what Francis Ngannou did, and that's partially true, but Francis Ngannou has undoubtedly inspired others. And another main narrative, and I actually think this actually may be the main narrative that people go with, is Francis Ngannou's never going to fight for PFL. He screwed over PFL. How could he? He screwed over PFL. He signed a contract with them and they never fought for him. He didn't screw over PFL, even if he never fights for PFL. There's talk of the Renan Ferreira fight after he just KO'd Ryan Bader. I think that's an interesting fight. Renan Ferreira is an absolute beast. But even if he never fights for PFL, him signing with PFL didn't give him leverage to get a boxing fight, okay? The PFL deal was independent of the Tyson Fury match. He didn't need to sign with PFL to get the Tyson Fury fight. He got the Tyson Fury fight. The PFL deal that he signed gave him the availability to box, but had PFL not given him the availability to box, he would have never signed with PFL. He would have just waited it out and see if he could get this boxing match with Tyson Fury before he signed a contract. That is the whole point of contention between Francis Ngannou in the UFC. So while I think it's disappointing for PFL if Francis Ngannou never fights in MMA for PFL, you have to understand if Francis Ngannou goes out there and KOs Anthony Joshua, which I predict he will, he's most likely going to fight the winner of Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. Again, I don't really watch boxing. I'm assuming that's who he's going to box next. That is a mega fight. We're talking 50, 60, 70 million. I'm not sure exactly what the numbers will be. He's most likely getting around 20 to 30 million for this fight against Anthony Joshua. Why would he not take that opportunity versus the money he's going to get paid by PFL, which makes him the highest paid MMA heavyweight of all time, according to Dana White's assertions, because the deal pays more than what the UFC was willing to pay, and that's what Dana White said it was. But I think a lot of people are going to harp on the fact he screwed over PFL. He did PFL dirty. Let me just say this. While it's disappointing if he never fights in PFL for PFL, it is a net gain for PFL. Think of all the publicity that they have gotten from signing Francis Ngannou. And while Francis probably had every intention of fighting for PFL, the success of his boxing career, that's been his dream for many years, how can he put that on hold when there's no way PFL can even come close to the amount of money that Saudi Arabia is going to offer him in the mega fights that he's going to be in if he beats Anthony Joshua? So I think those are going to be the main narratives if he wins. But let's talk about the narratives if he loses, because the narrative if he wins, again, no pay-per-view sales, nobody can recreate this, and essentially he screwed over PFL. If he loses, the narratives are going to be Francis Ngannou's irrelevant, send him back to PFL where he can fight nobodies and draw no pay-per-views. Another one is going to be, oh, well, the only reason he had any success against Tyson Fury is because Tyson Fury didn't take him seriously. That is what the narratives will be. And also it'll be, look, he took this chance and look, he failed. He's 0-2 in boxing. That's kind of another partial narrative that will be thrown out there if Francis Ngannou loses. But let's set it straight right now. If Francis Ngannou loses, he will have made more money in 2 boxing matches. If he never gets another boxing match again, which he may very well, he will have made more money in 2 boxing matches than anyone in the UFC has ever made for a single fight. Or not for a single fight, but just in general in the UFC. But I guess if you combine career earnings, the point is payday to payday for each one of those boxing matches. Let's put it this way. Francis Ngannou is getting paid more than any singular fighter in the UFC for any one fight ever, outside of maybe Conor McGregor, which almost definitely Conor McGregor has gotten paid more than Francis Ngannou for one fight, at least for the Tyson Fury match, because the Tyson Fury match is somewhere between 10 and 15, maybe 10 and 20, depending on, kind of some deals they worked out, but at least 10 million, we know that. No fighter in the UFC is getting a $10 million purse outside of Conor McGregor ever. And in this next fight, Ngannou is going to get paid $20 million at least. So in one night for this Anthony Joshua fight, he's made more money than any UFC fighter outside of Conor McGregor for one fight. And we're talking by miles. Conor McGregor, it wouldn't shock me. I don't know, because for the Khabib fight with the pay-per-view points, that was the highest selling pay-per-view of all time. I don't know what Conor's highest payday ever would have been in the UFC. But either way, it's going to be close to comparable to Francis Ngannou's payday against Anthony Joshua. So even if he never boxes again and he's gone to PFL, he has now generated generational wealth from 2 boxing matches that the UFC would have never let him have. And now he's going to PFL where he's making more money than he would have made in the UFC. And there's people that will pay for him to knock out quote-unquote bums over in PFL, even though there's good fighters outside the UFC. There's not a whole lot of depth at heavyweight, as we know, but I think the Renan Ferreira fight is actually kind of interesting. But that is the narratives that people will push out there about Francis Ngannou, no matter what he does. And the reason they're doing this, and I already kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, they want it to be a cautionary tale. They want to tell other fighters, other UFC fighters in particular, you can't do what Francis Ngannou did. Let me break this down for you, and I already have a whole dedicated video on this. I'll link it down in the description as well. The reason Conor McGregor's not fighting right now, the reason Michael Chandler's out there with one dude on his mind for the last 2 years is because of Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou is the reason that Conor McGregor's not fighting right now in the UFC, because Conor McGregor has 2 fights left on his deal. He wants to fight out his deal, or he wants to wait for the sunset clause, which tells you 5 years from the time you sign your contract, you can get out of your contract. That's how Francis Ngannou left the UFC by choice. He was not cut by the UFC. Because guess what? Conor McGregor, he's been hanging out in Saudi Arabia for every big Saudi Arabia event. He's been talking about, I want to box Manny Pacquiao. Why would Conor McGregor want to come back to MMA, fight for the UFC for smaller paychecks against tougher competition, instead of just going boxing for Saudi Arabia, where he's going to get these massive paydays and he's going to have easier fights in a way? He may still lose, but he doesn't have to worry about kicking that formerly broken leg. Conor McGregor was inspired by Francis Ngannou. It's crazy because Ngannou was probably inspired by Conor back in the day. Now Conor's taken inspiration from Francis Ngannou. And then on top of that, Derek Lewis, when his heavyweight contract, he fought out his contract. He was kind of buried on the prelims, and there was an injury. He got moved up to the main card. He got paid because of Francis Ngannou. There's countless other fighters who have gotten paid because of Francis Ngannou. There is a credible rumor, it's not confirmed yet, that Ilia Topuria almost signed with the PFL. He was offered a massive contract with the PFL. This is before the Volkanovski fight, and he signed the deal with PFL. But the UFC has the rights to match, and the UFC matched the offer and probably had some escalations in that, and also a guaranteed title shot, because they looked at Topuria and they said, you know what? This is a budding star for a market we want. We're about to give him a title shot. He's young. He has the skill set. Let's re-sign him. So Francis Ngannou, in a way, he got Ilia Topuria paid because he set the blueprint, and that's exactly what Dana White and the UFC's biggest fear was. Francis Ngannou laying the blueprint for future fighters and causing kind of a headache for Dana White and the UFC. That's why you notice Dana White was never asked specifically about Francis Ngannou, Tyson Fury, other than one softball interview. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? It's because Dana White's infuriated with it, because it's caused him headaches, not for the next year, not for the next 6 months, not for the next 2 years, not for the next 3 years, forever. Because Francis Ngannou is Flick from A Bug's Life, and Dana White is Hopper. If you let one ant stand up, they might all stand up. And if they all stand up, there goes our way of life. And that's exactly what Francis Ngannou did, and it paid off for him big time in the form of tens of millions of dollars. And if he wins this fight against Anthony Joshua, all bets are off. He's going to be one of the richest combat athletes of all time and go down in history. He's already going to go down in history. Everyone's going to remember Francis Ngannou. But if he wins this Anthony Joshua fight, he's going to go down in history as one of the greatest of all time in combat sports. Former heavyweight champion, or really current UFC heavyweight champion, never lost his belt. But I get it, time, and he hasn't fought there. And then if he goes on to fight the winner of Fury and Usyk and somehow wins that fight, can you imagine a world where Francis Ngannou gets a heavyweight boxing belt around his waist? That'd be absolutely insane. But I just want you guys to use your critical thinking when you see these narratives come out after the fight. And if he gets KO'd, they're going to dance on Francis Ngannou's grave. I was about to end this video, but let me just say this. If Anthony Joshua KOs Francis Ngannou, sure, it's not good for his health. Sure, it's not the greatest outcome for him, But at the end of the day, he dared to be great. He got a massive payday that's going to set his family up for life. And he got KO'd. Fair enough. He can come back and return and still have success in MMA and potentially boxing. I don't know the grand scheme of the boxing world, what they would do with him. But I guarantee, I'll end the video with this. If Francis Ngannou gets KO'd, they will dance on his grave like nobody has ever danced on his grave. And they will have a shit-eating grin. They'll say, I told you so. You shouldn't have done there. Now you got KO'd and now you're irrelevant in boxing and you can go to PFL and nobody's going to care. And it's not going to sell any pay-per-views. I hope that doesn't happen. I'm praying that to the MMA gods, to the boxing gods, if there are any, that Francis Ngannou beats Anthony Joshua, but I'm really looking forward to this boxing match. Francis Ngannou has turned me into a boxing fan. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you turn on notifications. Let me know your prediction for the fight. I'm genuinely curious. And join me Friday night for the live stream as we watch Anthony Joshua versus Francis Ngannou. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.